I have the privilege today to share with you some great book recommendations from some great authors. I'm hopeful that among the books mentioned here, you might find something that piques your interest. Hi, I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read. To preview and hype my upcoming 8 months in the making top 210 sci-fi books episode, I'm going to consider most of the books mentioned in this episode to be the honorable mentions for that list. Some of these I've read or intend to read, and others were recommended to me and you by some incredible authors. In June, July, and August, I interviewed several authors and asked them questions about several books, science fiction, other science fiction authors, and to recommend some books. I'll be sharing more from those interviews in upcoming episodes. For honorable mentions, I'm going to start with books that I've actually read. These two were on my top 150 list, but I'm excluding them this time around. I love these short story compilations, but because they lack cohesion as fix-up novels, I'm going to leave them off of my top novels list. There's Siberiad by Stanislaw Lem. Who is the reader that you might recommend the Siberiad to? Or what could folks expect from that?
Well, I think certainly people who want to, well, people with a sense of humor, right? I mean, because that is just such a freaking funny book, but also people who want to push their reading outside the sort of traditional geographic boundaries, because it's Lem, and honestly, if anybody loves the Siberiad and is like, oh, I've seen Lem's written a lot, there's going to be 30 more books like the Siberiad, it'd be like, no, no, no. They're just like all over the place, right? So yeah, sense of humor and wanting to kind of go outside those boundaries would be two big qualities in that reader.
The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. These are really great short stories, and I absolutely recommend them. There's some real gems in here, but the cohesiveness of using the Illustrated Man having these dreams and recalling these stories, it doesn't work to pull this together as a fix-up. It doesn't diminish any of the stories, but it just doesn't work as a novel, so we're not going to be including that on this list. Author of such amazing books as Blind Sight, Echopraxia, The Freeze Frame Revolution, Starfish, and many other great books, Peter Watts will be making several appearances on the Top 210 episode, and I also asked him about a Robert Silverberg book that I haven't read and what he might recommend. He mentioned a number of Silverberg books. He mentioned Recalled to Life, Tower of Glass, The Feast of St. Dionysus, The Stochastic Man, and The World Inside, and he specifically filmed and recommended this book.
Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg. Sorry I don't have a copy to hold up. I loaned mine out to somebody, they never gave it back. I've always loved Robert Silverberg's prose. He's one of maybe 4 people that I have consciously ripped off when trying to develop my own writing style. And pretty much all of his books are gorgeously wrought on a prose level, but to me, Dying Inside was something new. It was a literary SF novel placed firmly in the present day, which was back then the 70s. With no tech, no aliens, none of the usual SF trappings. Just a socially awkward telepath who makes a menial living by ghostwriting term papers for university undergrads, squandering the greatest gift anyone ever had on mere subsistence. Dying Inside tells the story of what happens as that gift begins to fade. It stretched my brain without resorting to a single special effect.
Stephen Barnes has written for The Outer Limits, The Twilight Zone, Stargate SG-1, and Star Trek The Next Generation. He has been nominated for Hugo, Nebula, and Cable Ace Awards. He co-wrote The Legacy of Heorot with Larry Niven and Jeremy Purnell, and is the author of Lion's Blood, a number of Star Wars novels, and many other great books. He will also be making an appearance on my Top 210 episode. One of my most anticipated reads for the fall is Lion's Blood. What influenced you to write Lion's Blood?
Well, Betsy Mitchell at Time Warner Books, she was asking me what I was working on, and I mentioned that I was working on a book set in a world in which Africans had colonized the Americas, bringing white slaves here. I mean, you can't grow up in America and be black and not wonder why history was the way it was. The default assumption that America made about us was that we are inferior. I mean, that's, I would say the average white person in America may be the average black person. I'm not sure. I hope so. I hope not. It has a belief in black inferiority, not because every one of them does, but because there are, I would say 20% definitely have that belief, and need to be a matching 20% who believe we were better for the average to fall, in the middle. So if the best it gets is, well, they're equal, but you have some people who are saying definitely, no, they're not. That's going to tilt the average. So that's what we've been struggling with for 400 years, is a mythology that justified an economic institution. It became, of course, a social institution. It wasn't just labor. It was also, social position and sexual access and other things. But the question, why did this happen, is one that Black people have definitely struggled with. And I think that for most of our history, we did not understand enough about genetics and epigenetics and anthropology to have a scientific answer that was more easily believable and useful than simply believing, what the Encyclopedia Britannica said in the 40s. The intelligence goes, whites first, then Asians, then Black people. Or, Edgar Rice Burroughs in the Jungle Tales of Tarzan, who basically, said white men have imagination, Black men have little, animals have none. That was, the dominant mythology. So it is, I think, natural that I would want to throw my hat in the ring and offer an opinion. That opinion being that people are just people. And that white people in the position Black people were in would behave like Black people. Black people in the position white people were in would behave like white people. And so it took me 6 years of research to write that book. But all I really wanted the reader to experience was a crackling good adventure story about the friendship of two boys who grew into men in an alternate world, with the subtext being the question, what are we? I inevitably it comes up to text a few times, but primarily the thought was, if I can write a really good adventure story set in this world, I can do something good.
Earlier this year, I presented my top 10 sci-fi short stories of all time. Number 7 on that list was The Regression Test by Wole Talabi. I reached out to Wole for an interview and to discuss a few books that we both enjoy and to share his thoughts. Additionally, I asked him for some recommendations for science fiction and fantasy authors to share with you.
So some authors I would definitely recommend, and I'll mention a few specific books. I'd say one author to definitely check out is Buchi Echemeta. She was writing, I believe, in the 70s and 80s. She had her own press. She did sell quite internationally a little bit in the UK as well. But she's written quite a few books that are definitely science fiction. The first contact allegories and things like that. So yes, that's definitely one to check out, Buchi.
Dennis E. Taylor, author of We Are Legion, We Are Bob, and the excellent Bobbyverse series, shared with me a couple of books that influenced him as a writer. One of these books, The Martian, is not an honorable mention, as it will show up ranked on the top 210 episode, but I'm okay with double dipping for a great book recommendation. While Dennis will be on the top 210 episode talking about another book, here are 2 ideas for your next read.
Hi, I'm Dennis Taylor, author of the Bobbyverse series. If I'm to talk about books that have influenced me in my writing career, the 2 biggest ones would have to be The Lost Planet by Angus McVicar, because it hooked me on SF in the first place, and The Martian by Andy Weir, because it was an interesting, accessible novel written by someone who wasn't a career writer at the time. The Martian also broke quite a few writing rules along the way, but made it work. Anyway, as Captain Barbosa says, they be more like suggestions than rules. I think the best thing about The Martian, and something that's not often brought up, is that there is no bad guy in the book, no antagonist. Every single individual is a good person trying to do right. This alone helps to avoid a ton of cliches and overused tropes. The book and the way it came to market showed me that writing is still very much an individual effort, and that ultimately the only measure of a good book is whether people want to read it.
Rachel Aukes is the author of the Deadlands Saga, the Colliding Worlds trilogy, the Fringe series, and many other great books and series. During a recent interview, I asked Rachel for some science fiction book recommendations.
If I was going to go classics, I'd go The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. I'm a big Heinlein fan. I've read a lot of his works. And I like a lot of his stories because there's so much depth to them. I mean, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is a very political story, which I hate politics, and I try to avoid them always on social media because that you're just going to get dirty. But he makes it into an interesting story and has such a good realistic AI in it. And if I'm going to throw into an indie book, I would say the Janus Group series by Piers Platt is it starts off with Wrath's Deception is book 1, I believe, but it's basically an assassin in space, and it's just so well written and so fun. So I really hope more people read that. So yeah, like I said, I really hit every subgenre and different types of books within science fiction.
Guilty of repeat double dipping. 2 from this next list of books will also be represented on my top 210 list. Stacey, Kade, who also writes under the pen name S.A. Barnes, is the author of the 2022 sci-fi horror release Dead Silence. What science fiction books have you loved?
So I feel like you're asking me to pick favorite children here, and that's really hard. But I'm going to give you some in random order, so please do not associate. Murderbot is my favorite. I will read any Murderbot, anything that comes out. I love Murderbot. A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, fantastic. Dead Silence, which is very close to Dead Silence, which is mine. Dead Space, which is hers. I always get those flipped. Dead Space by Callie Wallace. That was a fantastic read. Hope's Folly, which is by my critique partner and mentor, Linnea Sinclair. Yeah, I loved. I mean, that's a few of them, and I could go on forever, but I loved all of those.
Wole Talabi also referenced a few books, science fiction and fantasy, from some other acclaimed Nigerian authors.
Perhaps not science fiction, more fantasy. Ben Okri. I don't know if you've read The Famished Road, but that's a really entertaining, very interesting. It's a fantasy novel. For a long time, it wasn't recognized as such. You wouldn't find it in the World Fantasy archives or things like that. But it's a fantasy novel, and it's a very good one. I believe it was nominated for the Booker Prize as well, so should be readily available. I mentioned Cyprian Ekwensi. I would specifically recommend the book An African Night's Entertainment, which is, almost like the Arabian Nights in a sense of it's someone telling a story to someone else, but it's a story that includes adventure and, magic and these big elements. It's definitely it's a pulp classic, I would say, closer to novella length, if I remember correctly.
There are so many great self-published sci-fi by independent authors, and I appreciate Rachel Aukes sharing a few of those with us. Are there other self-published novels that come to your mind when you think of science fiction that you might recommend?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you've got all of the Nicholas Sansbury Smith. If you like the post-apocalyptic science fiction, his stories are always awesome. He's got the Extinction Cycle series. He's got the Helldiver series, which is my new favorite. Just fantastic. If you like softer post-apocalyptic science fiction, you've got the Sarah Lyons Fleming books that are great. She is just an amazing writer and storyteller. It's just nuts how good she is. And then going back just into the pure science fiction realm, I read a lot of military science fiction because that's kind of been my bread and butter lately. And you've got the Rick Partlow, who just writes amazing military science fiction. He's, with his Drop Trooper series is really popular. But, some of my favorite works by him is his short fiction, like short stories that you'll find in his anthologies or that he shares with his newsletter. And the guy's just amazing.
I will be sharing more from all of these great authors and others in future science fiction videos, so be on the lookout for those. Use this thing so you don't forget. Here's another gem from S.A. Barnes.
I want to be best friends with Murderbot. I don't really know how else to explain that. Like, I feel that voice. I'm always drawn to strong voice. That to me is the thing that will make me pick up a book among, above anything else. And I just love that voice, and I love the world that she's built, but also, how Murderbot operates in that world. And there is no specified gender for Murderbot. We all sort of, and it's just a really interesting space to occupy, and for this to be a beloved character. And I just love it. I admire the crap out of her. The other one, Fortune's Pawn, is the first book in the series, and it's by it's Rachel Aaron, who's a fantasy writer writing as Rachel Bach. And that whole series was amazing. And I don't think I realized how hard it is to write, and this would go for Becky Chambers as well, how hard it is to write an ensemble cast. And actually, I think Becky Chambers even switches POVs, and I didn't. But I mean, when I wrote my first draft of Dead Silence, I was like, oh, okay. Some of these people are not getting their just, their worth in this story. And I've got to figure out how to balance all of these things. And I think that anybody who makes it look that easy, the way that Rachel does, I mean, having done that now and fallen and, scraped my way through that, I'm kind of like, okay, that's really, really impressive.
My favorite 2021 release last year was Shards of Earth by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and Eyes of the Void is currently my favorite 2022 release. These are books 1 and 2 of the Final Architect series. Children of Time and Children of Ruin are already modern classics and worthy of any top science fiction list. I think Tchaikovsky also has pretty good taste in books and authors. I'm eager to share my full interview with you, but let's grab some quick recommendations from him first.
Adam Roberts is possibly just the cleverest man alive currently writing science fiction. Every one of his books is pretty much a detailed philosophy essay as well as a phenomenal piece of sci-fi. Claire North is an incredible writer. She has the most outlandish ideas that she really makes work. She writes incredibly hard-hitting sort of social commentary science fiction. Notes from a Burning Age is still one of the best books I've ever read. Becky Chambers, Emma Newman, Peter Beagle, as I mentioned for you, KJ Bishop, for sheer beauty of style. I've got a library behind me, and I could pretty much go through that and just keep giving you names, to be honest.
And I have The Thing Itself on my shelf back here too from Roberts. Would you suggest that I start with that book or something else by Roberts?
I'm trying to think. I think, what would I start with? Jack Glass is excellent. Bet is one of my personal favorites. That's possibly just because it's playing to my particular interests. But pretty much anything he's ever written is really very, very clever indeed.
Adam Roberts sounds pretty amazing. Well, guess what? I planned a 15-minute interview with Adam Roberts, the author of The Thing Itself, Beta, and a number of other great novels. And of course, we spoke for nearly an hour about science fiction. To our, yours and mine benefit, I also ended up with this great recommendation from him to you.
Again, you put me on the spot there, mate. I'll tell you what I will do. I will show you. I've just finished reading this book, and I think it's a book from last year, so it's a new book. But I think it is an instant classic. I think it will be a classic of future science fiction. It's, hang on, where are we? Elliot Whiteley's Skyward Inn, which has just been shortlisted for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is this big British science fiction award. I think should win it. I've read all the shortlisted titles, and I think this is by far the best. I think it is a genuine classic, and it appeals to me. I don't think it's widely known. I don't know if it's available in America. Having said that. Have you heard of Whiteley?
I'm not familiar. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that at all. So I love. Boom.
It is really, really good, and it speaks to me because there's a certain kind of Chris Priest quality to it, but it's also distinctively her own voice, her own writing. It's not a million miles away from a book like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, but again, it's its own thing, and it's doing really interesting things with alienness and the encounter between the alien and the human, and place and individuality and kind of losing yourself in the collective. It's just really expertly done, beautifully written. So I'll make that as a recommendation.
Thank you, Stacey, Kade, Stephen Barnes, Wole Talabi, Rachel Aukes, Adam Roberts, Dennis E. Taylor, and Peter Watts for sharing your thoughts on these books with those of us who love your work, respect your talent, and love reading science fiction. I'm excited to share the fuller interviews with these great authors and other great authors over the next few weeks on the channel. The subscribe button and the notification bell buttons and Twitter are the best ways to get alerts for new episodes. Thank you for watching. I'm Michael Leverts, and this is Fit to be Read.